They silenced the emissary, so Earth declared total war. The packet arrived at 0347 station time, and it did not contain a greeting. It contained coordinates. Lieutenant Commander Yusuf Adebayo had been awake for 19 hours by then, seated in the communications bay of the diplomatic vessel Meridian, watching the Vethkai conclave station rotate slowly against the dark. It was the size of a small moon. He had been watching it for 6 days, and it had not once stopped feeling like an insult, the way something that enormous could exist, and had never once thought to introduce itself to the species that built fire roughly 100,000 years ago. He read the coordinates. He understood them before he understood them, which is the worst kind of understanding. His hands sent the message to the recovery team while his brain was still trying to construct an alternative explanation. There was no alternative explanation. They found Ambassador Priya Sethi at those coordinates, 31 minutes later, drifting in the space between the station's outer ring and the boundary of what the Vethkai called their sovereign corridor. She was in her suit. That was the detail that moved through the meridian like a current no one touched. They had put the suit back on her, the suit she had been wearing when she crossed the corridor boundary, alone, carrying a translation device the size of a thumb drive, and a speech she had spent 4 months writing, and a quality of confidence that Yusuf had spent 6 days trying to borrow and failing. They had dressed her. They had sent her back wearing the suit. Deliberate, measured, a message composed with care. Yusuf sat in the communications bay and stared at the bulkhead for a long time, not because he had nothing to do, because he was trying to find the version of himself that was trained for this, the one who had spent 11 years in the UN Foreign Contact Corps, learning how to stay level when the ground moved. He found pieces of that version, not the whole thing. The recovery team brought her aboard in silence. Nobody said the things people say. There was a particular quality to that silence. Not empty, not numb, more like the silence of a room where everyone has just read the same sentence and nobody wants to be the first to look up. He went to the briefing room, pulled up the diplomatic pouch she had been carrying. Standard protocol required inventory on return. He inventoried. Translation device, undamaged, unused. Personal recorder, undamaged, unused. Her speech, folded in thirds, exactly as she had folded it when he watched her tuck it into the pouch that morning, 6 days ago. The morning she said she was jealous she got to go first. The morning she laughed when he told her to be careful, the way you tell someone to be careful when you are actually afraid and do not know what to do with it. He opened the speech. Read the first line. We come as students, not conquerors. He folded it, set it on the table. His hands were steady. He spent a long time being concerned about how steady his hands were. The Vethkai transmission arrived 40 minutes after the recovery team docked. No preamble. No expression of anything that corresponded to apology, regret, or acknowledgement that a human being had just been returned to her colleagues, without the thing that made her one. The transmission was a formal classification notice, issued under Conclave Directive 7 Omicron. Humanity had been assessed. The assessment was complete. The result was pre-threshold. Too biologically erratic, too tribally organized, too young by several orders of magnitude to qualify for formal contact under Conclave protocols. Ambassador Sethi had crossed into Conclave sovereign space without authorization. The response had been lawful under Directive 7 Omicron subsection 4, regarding the management of pre-threshold contact events. Yusuf read it twice. Not because he misunderstood it, because each time he read it he was hoping something in it would change. Nothing changed. Lawful, under their law, the law they wrote, the law no one had told humanity existed, because humanity was, by the terms of that same law, not qualified to be told. He sat with that logic for a while. He knew how to sit with bad logic. He had done it professionally for 11 years. This was not bad logic. This was something worse. This was internally consistent logic that produced a result he could not locate a language for. He wrote his transmission to Earth Command. It took him 40 minutes to write 4 words. They want no reply. He sent it. Then he sat back and watched the Vethkai station turning in the dark, and thought about Priya's hands, how wide they moved when she talked, how she took up exactly as much space as she needed, and never apologized for it, how she had told him once, over terrible coffee in a Geneva briefing room, that the only honest reason to do this job was that meeting something new was the closest thing to a miracle a person could manufacture with their own effort. He had agreed with her. He still agreed with her. He did not know what to do with that. Captain Hallivertinen found him in the corridor outside the briefing room at hour 14 of Earth's silence. She was a Finnish woman of approximately 50 who communicated through increments of jaw set, and right now her jaw was set at a frequency he had not seen before, something between immovable and tectonic. She did not ask how he was. She did not say anything about Priya, or the Vethkai, or the weight of what the last 14 hours had deposited on everyone aboard the Meridian like sediment. She handed him a coffee. He drank it. She stood with him for a while, both of them watching nothing in particular through the corridor viewport, and then she left, and the coffee was the most competent act of human warmth he had experienced in 2 weeks, and he thought about that for a long time after. 17 hours and 42 minutes after his transmission, Earth Command responded. Not to Yusuf specifically, to every human vessel, station, colony, and outpost in known space, the cook, the engine crew, 19-year-old Ensign Danjuma, who had a poster on the wall of his bunk that Yusuf had never paid attention to before, but paid attention to now, in the moment before the broadcast, as though the ordinary texture of a young man's preferences was something worth filing carefully. Yusuf read Earth's response alongside all of them. It was not long. It did not use the word war. It did not need to. There are statements that name themselves by what they describe, the way certain silences name themselves by what they precede. He read it once and stood in the corridor and felt the meridian around him, the hum of it, the particular frequency of a ship that was no longer in the same story it had been in yesterday, and thought about the coordinates they had transmitted, the clinical precision of them, the care with which the Vethkai had composed their message. They thought they were closing a file. He thought about Priya, how glad she was to go first, how she said she was jealous like she meant it, like the prospect of meeting something unknown and enormous was the kind of gift worth competing for. He hoped the Vethkai had good astronomers. Because what was coming from the direction of Earth was not going to be small, and it was not going to be quiet, and it was not going to fold its speech into thirds and tuck it into a pouch and wait politely at the border. He picked up her speech from the briefing room table and put it in his pocket. He could not have explained why. He just could not leave it there, in a room that was already becoming a different kind of room, floating in the dark outside a station that had looked at the best of what humanity chose to send, and decided the file was not worth opening. That felt wrong. The speech felt like it was owed something better than that. He kept it. He did not know yet what it was for. He would figure it out. That was the thing about humans that the Vethkai had not put in their report, and it was the most important thing. They always figured it out. Not quickly, not elegantly, not without cost, but they figured it out. The meridian turned, slow and steady, and the enormous ancient station kept rotating in the dark, and 17 hours and 42 minutes of silence broke like something that had been holding its breath. Earth had answered. The answer was not going to require a translator. 2 days later, Yusuf was reassigned. He did not ask for it. He did not fight it. Captain Virtanen called him in, set a tablet on the desk between them, and did not push it toward him, which he had learned meant the decision was made, but she was leaving him the dignity of picking it up himself. Transfer orders. Battle Group Flagship, the UNCS Johannesburg. Assignment category, Cultural and Behavioral Analysis, which was, as job titles went, the most honest description he had ever seen of what he had actually been doing for 11 years. "I'm a diplomat," he said, which was true, and also, he was beginning to understand, beside the point. "You were the only person on this ship who spoke to a Vethkai representative," Virtanen said. "I spoke to their automated border system for 40 seconds before they returned Priya. You're still the only one." He looked at the tablet for a long time. "You're going to need someone who understands them," she said. "Not to fight them, to read them. There's a difference." "I know the difference," he said. "I know you do," she said. "That's why I'm not asking." He picked up the tablet. That night he packed a small bag, translator, a change of clothes, the folded speech in the inside pocket where he could feel it when he breathed. He did not know yet that he was going to carry it through 2 years of the worst thing humanity had ever done in space. He would not have put it down even if he had known. Some things you carry not because they are light, but because putting them down would mean something you are not ready to let it mean. He was not ready. He boarded the shuttle to the Johannesburg at 0600, and behind him, the Meridian continued its slow turn in the dark, and the Vethkai station continued its ancient rotation, and somewhere in the gap between the two, the file that the conclave had tried to close was already reopening, faster and louder, and with considerably more propulsion than anyone who wrote Directive 7 Omicron had ever thought to calculate for. The Vethkai conclave had existed for 10,000 years. That number sounds large because it is. 10,000 years of organized interstellar governance, of conflict managed, and alliances forged, and species integrated, and borders drawn in the kind of ink that does not wash out. They had a model, a framework built on the observed behavior of every sapient species they had encountered over that entire span. 11 species, hundreds of contact events. The model had never failed. The model said, a species at early development, confronted with overwhelming asymmetric power, demonstrates fear, then retreat, then negotiation from diminished position. Every time, every species, without exception. The Vethkai ambassador to their own High Council, in the classified report that Yusuf would not read for another 6 months, had written the following sentence in the section on human assessment. We have no predictive framework for a species that responds to asymmetric threat by becoming more aggressive, not less. He had written that sentence 3 days before Earth's response. He had classified the report and filed it, and presumably gone about his day, secure in the knowledge that the assessment was complete, the file was closed, and the pre-threshold species would demonstrate the expected behavioral response. He was going to have a very difficult several months. They all were. But that part of the story had not started yet. For now, there was just Yusuf on a shuttle, Priya's speech in his pocket, and the stars outside the small window doing what stars do, which is exist without comment on anything that happens in the small warm spaces between them. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and watched them for a while. Then he closed his eyes, and the shuttle moved, and everything that came next began. The coalition vote took 61 hours. 61 hours from Earth's first broadcast to full commitment from every nation, every colony, every independent station humanity had managed to scatter across the systems it had reached in its brief and chaotic expansion into space. 61 hours for a species that had spent the previous 3 centuries being unable to agree on trade tariffs. Nobody who understood human political history could explain it. Nobody who had seen the footage from the recovery team had any trouble understanding it at all. They had dressed her. That detail moved through every human population in known space with a quiet consistency that had nothing to do with news cycles or political persuasion. It was not an argument. You could not debate it or contextualize it. It was simply a fact that sat in the mind and did a specific kind of work, the kind that does not announce itself but reorganizes everything around it. The Vethkai had wanted to send a message. They had succeeded. The message they sent was not the message they intended. The message they intended was, you are small, you are young, you are beneath our notice, and this interaction is over. The message humanity received was, we looked at the best of you, and decided the file wasn't worth opening. These are very different messages. The difference between them was going to cost the Vethkai conclave more than they had modeled. Yusuf read the coalition announcement in the communications bay of the Johannesburg as it crossed into the outer system, and he thought about what it had taken, not the politics, the arithmetic of grief and something else, something that did not have a clean name in any language he spoke, the thing that lives in humans specifically, in the gap between being dismissed and responding to being dismissed. Other species, the conclave's model said, respond to that gap with retreat. Humans respond to it by walking faster toward the thing that dismissed them. He did not know yet whether that was courage or something more complicated. He was starting to think the distinction did not matter as much as he had once believed. The Johannesburg accelerated. And the story stopped being about a speech and started being about what happens when the galaxy's oldest filing system encounters a species that was never in the files. Admiral Constance Oduya had a voice like a fixed point, not loud, not theatrical. The kind of voice that did not need to fill a room, because the room reorganized itself around it. She was 63 years old, Lagos-born like Yusuf, which he learned from her file, and never mentioned, because she was not the kind of person you mention things like that to. She had commanded fleet operations for 22 years. She had gray in her hair and a patience that was not warm. It was more like geological, the patience of something that had simply decided to wait longer than everything else. She met Yusuf in the briefing room of the Johannesburg the day he came aboard, and she said 3 things. You read alien languages. You were the last human to communicate with a Vethkai system. You will tell me what they are thinking before they think it. He did not say that was not technically how behavioral analysis worked. He said, "Yes, Admiral." She nodded and left. That was the whole meeting. He spent the next 4 days in his small quarters, reading everything in the intelligence database on Vethkai communication patterns, behavioral records, historical engagement protocols. There was not much. The Conclave had not made a habit of sharing their internal documentation with species they classified as pre-threshold, which created the obvious problem that the species they classified as pre-threshold had very little data on the species doing the classifying. What they did have was a captured intelligence summary, 6 months old, translated by an algorithm that was, at best, approximate. Yusuf read it 3 times, and then spent an evening improving the translation by hand, which was not something his training had strictly prepared him for, but which his particular brain handled with the focus of someone doing something too important to be distracted from. The summary was a Vethkai internal assessment of humanity. It had been commissioned after the Meridian first appeared at the Conclave's outer boundary. It covered human biology, social organization, territorial history, technological development, and what the Vethkai analyst called behavioral variance modeling. The behavioral variance section was where things got interesting. The Vethkai analyst had written his assessment with the careful, structured language of someone who had been doing this work for a very long time and had never once been surprised by his own results. He was surprised. He did not say so directly. The language was formal and measured. But Yusuf had spent 11 years learning to read what formal, measured language was doing around its edges, and what this language was doing around its edges was quietly alarmed. The biological section noted human pain tolerance as, and Yusuf had to run the phrase through 3 iterations of the translation before he was satisfied with it, medically concerning, not in the sense of illness, in the sense of an entity confronted with something its models had not prepared it for. The social organization section noted that humans had spent the majority of their recorded history in conflict with each other and had nevertheless maintained continuous technological development, which the analyst described as an anomaly he could not fully account for. The behavioral variance section was the most interesting. The Vethkai model, the framework that had governed their contact protocols for 10,000 years, was built on a simple premise. All sapient species, when confronted with a threat significantly larger than themselves, demonstrate a predictable behavioral arc: fear, assessment, retreat, negotiation from a position of acknowledged weakness. The model had worked for every species they had ever encountered. The model predicted that humanity, confronted with the Conclave's response, would transmit a formal request for negotiation within 72 hours. The analyst had written this section before Earth's response arrived. At the bottom of the section, someone had added a handwritten annotation, or the Vethkai equivalent of handwritten, a different ink pressure, a different symbol density. Yusuf ran it through the translation algorithm 4 times, and the best he got was something like, "The predicted response has not materialized. The file is being escalated." He sat with that annotation for a while. The file is being escalated. He almost felt sorry for whoever had to handle that escalation. Almost. He took the summary to Admiral Oduya. She read it in silence, set it on the table between them, looked at him. "They tried to predict us," she said. "They've been predicting every species they've met for 10,000 years, he said. "It's worked until now. What's their model missing?" He thought about how to answer that. He had been thinking about it since he read the summary, since before that, actually. Since the moment he read Priya's speech for the first time, sitting in a briefing room with the speech of a woman who flew towards something most people would have flown away from and thought it was the right thing to do. "They model fear as a function of power differential," he said. "The bigger the gap between your strength and the threat's strength, the more fear you should experience, and the more your behavior should contract. Pull back. Protect what you have. Don't make it worse. And we don't do that. We don't do that consistently enough for it to be predictive, he said, which from a modeling standpoint is the same as not doing it at all. A model that works 80% of the time is a model. A model that fails on unpredictable occasions is just a guess. Oduya looked at the summary for a moment longer. So they don't know what we're going to do. They don't have a framework for what we're going to do. She picked up the summary, set it down on her side of the table. Then we make sure what we do is as far outside the framework as possible. He nodded. Then he said, Admiral, what are we actually going to do? She looked at him for the first time since he had come into the briefing room with the look of someone assessing whether the information is going to be useful or just alarming. She decided, apparently, that he fell into the useful category. We're going to cross the sovereign corridor, she said. Every fleet element we have. We're going to make contact with their forward defense line. And we're going to do the thing they're absolutely certain we will not do. He waited. We're going to accelerate, she said. He understood that she did not mean the ship. He went back to his quarters and read the behavioral summary again, and thought about acceleration. Not as a tactic, as a fact of human character. The thing that had gotten them from controlled fire to interstellar space in an eye blink of galactic time. The thing that had gotten Priya Sethi into her suit with a translation device and a speech, and the particular brightness of someone walking toward a thing they had decided was worth the cost of reaching. Acceleration. Not because the destination was certain, because stopping was not something they knew how to do when something mattered. He went to sleep thinking about that and woke up 4 hours later to the Johannesburg's general alarm, which meant they had crossed the corridor boundary, which meant the first engagement of what would become humanity's first interstellar conflict had begun. He was dressed and in the tactical bay in 6 minutes. Corporal Adeze Nwosu was stationed outside the tactical bay because, she explained to Yusuf on their first meeting, she had lost a bet involving the previous month's chess tournament, and the penalty was diplomatic babysitting duty, which she described with the tone of someone who has made their peace with consequences, but has not forgiven the person who bet against them. She was 22, Enugu-born. She had a way of standing that suggested she was at rest while also suggesting she could stop being at rest in a period of time too short to measure. She had been in 2 previous engagements, both colonial border disputes that were already fading into the category of things that happened before the thing that was currently happening. She told Yusuf she had been shot twice in the second engagement. She told him the way someone mentions minor construction work on their street. Informative. Not particularly emotional. He asked, because he could not help it, whether she was afraid. She looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has been asked a question that does not quite map onto the inside of their head. Of them? She said, and her gesture took in the general direction of the Vethkai fleet on the other side of the corridor boundary. 11 species of organized galactic civilization, 10,000 years of unbroken institutional power. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The sentence was complete. The period was her expression, mildly puzzled, not unkind, the face of someone who genuinely could not locate the fear that the question was asking about. Yusuf found this simultaneously the most encouraging and the most unsettling thing anyone had said to him since he came aboard. The first engagement lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. He spent it in the tactical bay with one screen showing the fleet positions and another running translation algorithms on every Vethkai transmission they intercepted. Most of the transmissions were tactical. Formation calls, weapons status, the kind of communication that reads the same in any language, because the underlying logic is identical. Then, a different kind of transmission. He read it as it came through, translated it twice to be sure. It was a deterrence communication. Standard format, he could tell, from the structure. The Vethkai had a formal syntax for these, and once he understood the structure, the meaning was clear. It said that the human fleet had sustained significant losses, that it was operating at diminished capacity, that the conclave offered an opportunity to withdraw and reassess. He took the translation to Admiral Oduya. She read it, looked up. She did not look at it again. Tell them, she said, we have 70% of our hull and all of our reasons. He looked at her for 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than he had ever looked at Admiral Oduya without being asked to look at something specific. Then he went back to his station and translated her response into Vethkai formal communication syntax as accurately as he could manage. Across the corridor, something happened. He did not learn the specifics until much later. What he learned, from a subsequent intelligence intercept, was that the Vethkai fleet commander had needed to be held back from ordering a full retreat, not because the human fleet was winning. By any conventional military measure, the human fleet was not winning. 3 ships destroyed, 7 heavily damaged. The Johannesburg herself had taken a strike that removed a third of her forward sensor array and killed 21 people and dropped her to 30% combat capability. By any model the Vethkai had, a fleet at 30% combat capability, receiving a deterrence communication from an enemy at full strength, should have demonstrated a specific behavioral response. It should have stopped. It did not stop. The Vethkai fleet commander had been doing this work for decades. He had seen every possible variation on the deterrence moment, the point where an outmatched force recognizes the arithmetic and adjusts its behavior accordingly. He had never seen an outmatched force respond to a deterrence communication by accelerating. The model did not have a category for it. When the model does not have a category for something, the something becomes frightening in a way that raw power cannot be. Raw power you can measure. You can plan around it. You can exceed it or absorb it or outlast it. A thing outside your model is a different problem. You cannot plan around something you cannot predict, and you cannot predict something that does not follow your rules. The Vethkai fleet commander, by the account Yusuf would read 6 months later, sat in his command chair and watched the human fleet advance at 30% capacity in response to his deterrence communication, and experienced something the Conclave model had never prepared him for. He experienced doubt, not about the outcome of this specific engagement, about the model, about 10,000 years of reliable prediction, about what it meant that something existed in the galaxy that his framework could not account for. He ordered a tactical withdrawal, not a retreat. He would not call it that in any report, but a repositioning, room to reassess, room to update his calculations. The human fleet did not follow. It held its position, steady, unchanged, as if it had said what it needed to say and was waiting. Yusuf, in the tactical bay, watched the Vethkai formation pull back on his screen and felt something he did not have a clean word for. Not triumph. Triumph was too simple. This was more complex, a feeling that sat at the intersection of grief and something that was beginning, very slowly and against considerable resistance, to resemble hope. He picked up his translation pad and started preparing a preliminary behavioral report for Admiral Oduya. He wrote, "They are not afraid of us. They are afraid of their own inability to predict us. That is a more useful kind of fear." He read it back, left it in the report. It was the most honest thing he had written in weeks. That night, or what passed for night on a vessel running on a schedule that had lost its relationship to any particular sun, Yusuf read Priya's speech again. He had read it 6 times by now. The creases were beginning to soften. He was careful with them. The paper was actual paper, which she had preferred for documents she cared about. She had mentioned it once. The specific satisfaction of a physical document that you could hold and fold and carry in a pocket, versus the forgettable cleanness of a screen. He read the speech slowly this time. There was a line in the 3rd paragraph that he had noticed before but not fully heard until now. It said, "We do not come as the strongest species in this galaxy. We do not come as the oldest. We certainly are not. We come as what we have always been, beings who decided that the cost of connection was worth the risk of rejection." He folded the speech. He set it on the small surface next to his bunk and looked at it for a while. He thought about the cost. He thought about Priya walking through a corridor in a Vethkai sovereign zone, with a speech in her pocket and a translation device in her hand, and the particular brightness of someone who has decided that the thing they are walking toward is worth whatever it costs to reach. He thought about 21 names on a list he had received that afternoon. People who had been in the port observation deck of the Johannesburg when the strike hit. People who had been doing ordinary things at the moment the ordinary things ended. He thought about 61 hours of coalition building, about the cook and the engine crew and Ensign Danjuma and the 19-year-old face of someone who was old enough to be here and young enough that it was not fair. He thought about the cost. Then he thought about the rest of the line, the part after the colon, the part that said, The cost of connection was worth the risk of rejection. Priya had written that before she knew what the rejection would actually look like. She had written it believing in the outcome she was trying to build. He picked up the speech and put it back in his jacket pocket. Tomorrow there would be another briefing, another round of intercepted transmissions, another set of behavioral calculations to run on a species that had tried to close a file on humanity and was beginning to discover what humanity did with closed files. He would be ready. He had a speech in his pocket and a job to do, and the particular stubbornness of a man who has been told that the thing he believes in is naive, who has watched the cost of that belief arrive in its worst possible form, and who has decided anyway. Who has decided? Anyway. The Johannesburg moved through the dark toward whatever came next, and Yusuf pressed his hand flat against the bulkhead and felt the hum of the engines and thought, "We are still here. We are still here." That was the first thing. Everything else came after. The 6th month of the campaign was the month Yusuf stopped sleeping well. Not because of the engagements. He had learned to work around those, the sharp, spiked hours of incoming data and decision and calculation, followed by the flat aftermath, where everyone on the ship moved a little more slowly than usual and did not make much eye contact. He had learned the rhythm of that. It was not comfortable, but it was predictable, which in the context of interstellar conflict passed for something resembling stability. What kept him awake in the 6th month was the intercepted internal conclave communication that arrived in the intelligence feed on a Tuesday, buried between 2 tactical assessments and a routine supply manifest. He almost missed it. He did not miss it. He read it at 0230, and then he sat in the dark of his quarters and stared at the bulkhead for 2 hours before he went to Admiral Oduya's door and knocked. She answered in approximately 30 seconds, fully dressed, which told him something about how she spent her nights that he had not known before, and filed away with the other things about Admiral Oduya that he had learned not to mention. He handed her the translation without preamble. She read it standing in the doorway. The communication was between 3 members of the Vethkai High Council and 2 representatives from non-Vethkai conclave species. It was marked with a classification level his translation algorithm had rendered as something between urgent and unprecedented. It concerned Directive 7 Omicron, the pre-threshold classification that had produced this entire chain of events, and it was requesting a formal review. Not because the council members had developed ethical reservations about executing an emissary, because the campaign was affecting their behavioral model. The conclave model was not just a tool the Vethkai used, it was a shared resource. Every species in the 11-member conclave used it for military planning, diplomatic strategy, territorial management. It was the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years of interstellar governance. It was the foundation that every calculation rested on. And humanity had been breaking it, engagement by engagement, for 6 months, in front of everyone. 2 non-Vethkai conclave species had flagged internal inconsistencies in their own planning cycles. Their strategists were running scenarios and finding that the model's predictions did not match observed outcomes, not for humanity specifically, for their own projected behaviors under specific threat conditions. If the model was wrong about humanity, they were asking, how confident could they be that it was right about themselves? This was the question Yusuf had been waiting for, without knowing he was waiting for it. He watched Oduya finish reading. She set the translation down on the corridor wall beside her door and looked at him. "They're not just afraid of us," she said. "They're afraid of their own assumptions," he said. "We didn't just hurt them militarily. We made them doubt a framework they have used to understand everything for 10,000 years.
Oduya was quiet for a moment.
Not thoughtful quiet. She had a different quality of stillness when she was thinking. This was something else. Something that looked, very briefly, like what wonder would look like on a face that had decided decades ago that wonder was an inefficiency. "Good," she said. Then, again, "Good." He went back to his quarters and wrote his preliminary analysis of the communication, and then he wrote a secondary analysis of what it meant, and then he wrote a third document that was not really an analysis at all, but that he could not stop writing anyway. He titled the third document, internally, in his own head, What Priya Started. He did not put that title on the document. He filed it under a reference number and sent it to the intelligence division and went to sleep for 3 hours, which was the most he had managed in a week. The intelligence team's formal response to his analysis arrived 48 hours later, with 4 endorsements and 1 dissenting note from a strategist named Colonel Owen Baird, who had the specific quality of skepticism that comes from having been right about things for a long time. Baird's note said, "The behavioral disruption theory is interesting, but the conclave model has survived significant challenges across 10 millennia. One anomalous species does not invalidate 10,000 years of consistent data." Yusuf read that note 3 times. Then he wrote back, politely, 2 sentences. He said, "Every 10,000-year record was a 1-year record until it wasn't. The model didn't fail because we are stronger than them. It failed because we behaved like nothing they had ever met." Baird did not respond. Yusuf took that as something between agreement and the end of the conversation. He spent the next 2 weeks doing what Admiral Oduya had asked him to do when he first came aboard. He read the Vethkai. He read their communications, their tactical patterns, their behavioral shifts. He read them the way he had spent 11 years reading every alien thing humans had managed to make contact with, not looking for threat, but looking for the logic underneath the surface, the framework that made sense of all the pieces. The Vethkai were not incomprehensible. That was the thing. They were very comprehensible once you understood that they had been right about everything for so long that they had forgotten that being right is not the same thing as being complete. Their model worked because every species they had encountered fit the model. Not because the model was perfect, but because the sample was too small. 10,000 years sounds large. In galactic terms, it is a very short time to be doing a very narrow study. Humanity was the first anomaly they had encountered, and they had responded to the anomaly the way the model told them to respond. Reclassify, manage, close the file. They had not considered the possibility that the anomaly would decline to be closed. He was beginning to understand that this was the central thing, not the fleet engagements, not the tactical losses and gains, not even the fractures developing inside the conclave. The central thing was this. The conclave had tried to close a file on a species whose defining characteristic was that it did not accept closed files. Every engagement, every intercepted communication, every internal conclave dispute about the model, all of it traced back to the same root. They had tried to classify something that resisted classification, and the attempt had done more structural damage to their governing framework than any fleet engagement could have. He wrote this up in a clean memo, 3 pages, sent it to Oduya. She called him in 30 minutes later. "This is useful," she said, which from Oduya was equivalent to someone else running into a room and shouting, "Thank you." What does it mean for the campaign? He had thought about this. He had thought about it very carefully. "It means the military campaign is not the only campaign," he said. "Every time we do something outside their model, we damage the model. We damage the infrastructure they use to make every decision. We're not just fighting their fleet, we're fighting their confidence." She absorbed that. And confidence is harder to replace than ships. "Ships they can build," he said. "The model took 10,000 years. They can't build another one on a Tuesday." Oduya sat back. For the first time since Yusuf had known her, she looked like someone who was revising something fundamental. "So we keep going," she said. "We keep going," he said. "Not because we can beat them ship for ship. We can't. But because every time we show them something their model didn't predict, we pull another brick out of the foundation." She nodded once. The kind of nod that closes a conversation and opens an action. He went back to his station. Adeyezi found him that evening in the mess at 0300, which had become their accidental meeting time, both of them ending up there in the specific kind of sleeplessness that could not be fixed by lying down, only walked around until it tired itself out. She had tea. He had the ship's approximate coffee, which he had stopped registering as coffee, and started registering as a warm substance that bought him another 2 hours of function. They sat for a while in the way they had learned to sit, not filling it, just occupying the same quiet. "I read your memo," she said. He looked at her. He had not sent the memo to Adeze. It was an intelligence document. She shrugged, which was not technically an explanation, but was very Adeze. "The model thing," she said. "You think they're going to fall apart from the inside." "I think there are cracks," he said. "Cracks don't always mean collapse. But sometimes they do. Sometimes." She drank her tea. He drank his not-quite coffee. Outside the mess viewport, stars moved in the slow way stars move when the ship is at cruising speed. Not dramatically, just steady. The kind of movement that reminds you that everything is always in motion, even when it looks still. "What happens if they fall apart too fast?" she said. He looked at her. She turned the mug in her hands. "We went to war because they killed Priya. Because they looked at her like she was nothing. Like the whole species was nothing worth meeting." She paused. "If they collapse internally before we get any kind of, I don't know, before we get anything real, before anyone actually answers for it, does that count?" He did not answer immediately. He thought about Priya, the speech, the particular brightness of someone walking toward something new. He thought about the 21 names on the list. He thought about Adeze standing outside the tactical bay with her mug, and her absolute absence of fear about the wrong things. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't think collapse counts. I think something has to be said." "By who?" "Someone will have to go and say it," he said. "When this is done, someone will have to go back." She looked at him over her tea, with the expression that meant she already knew the answer to the next question, and was asking it anyway. "That someone is going to be you, isn't it?" He did not answer. She nodded as if he had. "Worst job in history," she said. "Priya thought it was the best job in history," he said. "Going first, meeting something new." Priya got. She stopped, reconsidered, started again. "Priya paid for it." "Yeah," he said. "She did." They sat with that for a while. Then Adeze said quietly, "I hope whoever goes back makes it mean something." "So do I," he said. He meant, "I am going to try." He did not say that out loud yet. It was too early for that. There was still too much war between here and the thing he was describing. But the shape of it was already there, the way certain things are present before they are possible, before they are real, existing as a direction you move in, without yet knowing you are moving. He carried Priya's speech in his pocket, and drank his not-quite coffee and thought, when this is done. When this is done. 3 weeks later, the second major engagement happened, and the Vethkai fleet did something the model would not have predicted. It hesitated. Not long. A period of time that, in fleet engagement terms, was negligible. 8 seconds of delayed formation response, during which the Johannesburg's tactical team identified a gap and moved through it, and 3 Vethkai forward vessels, caught between formation protocols, executed conflicting maneuvers that put 2 of them in each other's defensive range. 8 seconds. The result was disproportionate to the hesitation, not because the Johannesburg's strike through the gap was catastrophically damaging. It was significant but survivable. The disproportionate result was in what the hesitation meant. The Vethkai fleet had hesitated. In 10,000 years of recorded conclave military history, their fleets did not hesitate. They executed. The model told them what to do. The formation followed the model. The result was predictable. The model had not told them what to do about a human fleet that behaved like a human fleet. The 8-second gap was the model's uncertainty made visible. Yusuf watched it in the tactical bay and wrote it down, and did not celebrate it, because it did not feel like something to celebrate. It felt like something to pay attention to, which was different. He filed his report. The report said, "They are beginning to lose confidence in real time." The hesitation was not tactical error. It was the model failing to produce a recommendation with sufficient speed, and the formation having no alternative framework to fall back on. He filed it and went to his bunk and lay awake thinking about 8 seconds. 8 seconds of doubt, in the middle of a fleet engagement, produced by a species that had been walking toward things most people would walk away from since the first time they ever decided fire was worth touching. He thought about that. He thought about acceleration. He thought, "We are still here. We are still here." He slept. The name in the intelligence summary was Carried Light of Ancestors. He saw it in a line of routine intercepts, wedged between a supply route reassessment and a conclave internal memo about formation doctrine, and his translation algorithm rendered it with the approximate confidence level of 82%, which was better than most alien proper nouns managed. Carried Light of Ancestors was the Vethkai fleet commander he had been reading for months, without ever having a name to attach to. The voice behind the tactical decisions. The mind behind the hesitation. the being who had reportedly needed to be physically restrained from ordering a full retreat after Oduya's response about 70% and reasons. He was used to knowing commanders by their decisions. Having a name changed something in a way he had not expected. The line in the summary that had the name also had a status update. Carried Light of Ancestors had been removed from active command. Quietly, without announcement. The kind of removal that happens when an institution needs to make a change, but does not want to have the conversation about why the change was necessary. The reason, reading between the formal language of the summary, was the hesitation, not just the 8-second gap in the second major engagement, a pattern, a series of tactical decisions in the months prior, where Carried Light of Ancestors had shown what the Conclave called in their language, something close to the phrase, irregular response latency in high ambiguity engagement scenarios. In plain terms, he hesitated when the model could not give him fast answers. In even plainer terms, he hesitated when he was dealing with humans. The Conclave had removed him from command, not because he had failed. By conventional metrics, he had not failed. They had removed him because he was becoming unreliable in the specific way that the model's failure made everyone unreliable, and the Conclave's response to that unreliability was to try to replace the commander rather than address the model. Yusuf read this and set down his translation pad and looked at the bulkhead for a while. It was the saddest thing he had read in months, which was a significant achievement given the competition. Carried Light of Ancestors had done everything correctly. He had followed protocols. He had used the model. He had executed his role with the precision of a commander who had been doing this for decades. And then he had encountered something the model could not account for, and the natural response of any intelligent being, pause, assess, recalibrate, had become a liability. The institution had decided the liability was the individual, not the model. That was a decision Yusuf recognized. He had seen institutions make it before, in smaller contexts, with smaller stakes. The model was wrong, so they moved the person who noticed that the model was wrong, because the model was more important than the person, and the institution needed the model to be right, even when it wasn't. He wrote none of this in his report. He filed a clean analysis of what Carried Light of Ancestors removal meant, tactically, which was that a new fleet commander would take several months to develop comparable familiarity with engagement patterns, which created a period of tactical advantage for the human fleet, which Oduya would want to know about. He sent it. Then he sat for a long time with his personal pad writing the other thing, the document he was not filing anywhere, the one that was not really analysis. He wrote, "They removed him for noticing that the model was failing. The model mattered more than the person who told them the truth about it. That is how institutions die, not from outside, from the inside, when they choose the framework over the reality." He looked at that for a while. Then he wrote, "Priya saw the reality. She wrote the speech that told the truth about what we are. They killed her for showing up with that truth before they were ready to hear it." He deleted the second paragraph. Then he undeleted it. Then he saved the document under a reference number and went to the mess to find something warm to drink. The new Vethkai fleet commander, the translation algorithm gave the name as something like Resolute in Purpose, which Yusuf suspected was a title as much as a name, was more cautious than Carried Light of Ancestors had been, more rigid, less willing to deviate from the model, even when the model's predictions were failing. This was, as Yusuf explained to Oduya in a briefing that she listened to with the quality of attention that meant she was already 3 decisions ahead of him, both good and bad news. "Cautious buys us time," she said. "Rigid means they're not adapting. Rigid also means they're not innovating," he said. "They're trying to stabilize by going back to the model rather than updating it." "Why does that matter?" "Because the model is still broken," he said. "Going back to a broken model more carefully is not the same as fixing it. They are going to keep getting outputs that don't match our behavior, and now they have a commander who will enforce those outputs rather than question them." Oduya sat back. "So they'll make more mistakes. Predictable ones," he said, "which is what we need." She looked at him for a moment, in the way she sometimes looked at him when he said something that landed differently than he expected it to. "You don't like saying that," she said. "No. Why not?" He thought about Carried Light of Ancestors, about the 8-second hesitation, about a being who had noticed the truth and been removed for it, while the institution continued making the same error, with more conviction. Because it means we're depending on them to keep being wrong, he said. That's not the same as being right. It's just a different kind of being wrong. She considered that. We need this to end, she said. I know. What ends it? He had been thinking about this for weeks. Not the tactical end. Oduya had people whose job was the tactical end. He had been thinking about the structural end, the thing that would produce a situation where talking was possible again, not because of goodwill, not yet, but because the alternative had become untenable for both sides. The conclave fractures further, he said. The non-Vethkai species, who have already raised doubts about the model break from Directive 7 Omicron formally. That removes the legal basis for the original action. It doesn't fix it, but it creates a different environment. How do we accelerate that fracture? He shook his head. We don't. We don't have to. They're doing it themselves. Every engagement where we do something outside the model, they have that conversation inside the conclave. Every intercepted communication from the dissenting species shows more doubt, more distance from the Vethkai position. So we wait. We keep going, he said. And we wait. And when the moment is there, someone has to go and meet it. He did not say that someone will be me. He did not say it because this was not the moment, and because Oduya already knew, in the way Oduya always knew things 3 decisions ahead, and the conversation did not need to have it said out loud. When the moment comes, she said, we'll be ready. He nodded. He went back to his station. He pulled up the growing record of intercepted conclave communications and read through them with the methodical focus of someone assembling a map one point at a time, building a picture of the fractures, the fault lines, the places where the 10,000-year institution was developing the cracks that Adazi had talked about in the mess at 0300. Cracks that sometimes mean collapse. He was starting to believe these were that kind. Month 8 brought the first formal defection. Not from the conclave entirely. One of the smaller member species, their name translated to something like the continuous current, which Yusuf privately thought was a beautiful name for a civilization, formally withdrew their endorsement of Directive 7 Omicron, not dramatically, no announcement to the human fleet, an internal notice, filed through conclave administrative channels, citing concerns about the scientific basis of the pre-threshold classification system, specifically citing the inconsistency between the model's behavioral predictions and observed human behavior as evidence that the classification rubric required review. It was bureaucratic language. It was the most consequential thing Yusuf had read in 8 months, because Directive 7 Omicron required unanimous endorsement from all member species to remain enforceable. The continuous currents withdrawal did not end the directive, but it created a formal record of internal dissent. It meant the next species to withdraw would not be first. It meant the cost of dissent had dropped. He sent the analysis to Oduya with 3 words in the subject line. Watch what happens. What happened was 2 more species filed similar notices within 6 weeks. Not all at once. Not loudly. The way ice develops cracks, quietly, structurally, in the places where the stress has been building longest. The Vethkai High Council issued a formal statement defending Directive 7 Omicron. The statement cited the original assessment criteria, the behavioral projections, the scientific basis of the pre-threshold classification system. It cited everything except the thing that was actually true, that the model had failed, and they knew it, and were protecting the model anyway, because the model was the foundation, and if the foundation cracked, the whole 10,000 years cracked with it. Yusuf read the statement and understood it completely. He also understood that a statement issued in defense of a directive that 3 member species had formally questioned was not a statement of strength. It was a statement issued by an institution that could feel the ground moving and was trying to hold it still with paperwork. Paperwork, in his experience, was not structural. He filed his analysis. He added 1 line at the bottom. He wrote, "They are defending the model because they cannot afford to admit it failed. The longer they defend it, the more it fails in front of the member species watching. They have created a situation where the truth becomes more visible, the harder they try to hide it." He sent it. Oduya called him in 20 minutes later. "You think this is the beginning of the end," she said. "I think this is the middle of something that will eventually be the beginning of the end," he said carefully. She almost smiled. He had seen her almost smile 3 times. He had started to think that was its own category of expression, particular to her, that meant something specific. What do we need? One more large species to formally dissent, he said. When it's 4 out of 11, the unanimous endorsement is gone. The directive is legally unsustainable. The Vethkai are isolated. And then? Then someone will want to talk, he said. She looked at him for the 3-second duration that meant she was deciding something. Start preparing for that conversation, she said. He nodded. He went back to his quarters that night and took out Priya's speech and read it in full. Not because he needed to, because it was month 8 and he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and reading it made him feel like something was being kept, something was being held that deserved to be held. The cost of connection was worth the risk of rejection. She had written that believing it. He was going to make it true. He was going to make it true, or he was going to use every year of experience he had trying. Outside the viewport, the stars were steady. Inside his pocket, the speech was warm. He kept reading. It was Adeyeze who said the thing he had been thinking for months. On the night the 4th species withdrew from Directive 7 Omicron, and the Vethkai High Council went silent for 72 hours. She said it plainly, the way she always said things, in the mess at something approximating 0300, over tea, and the substance he had stopped calling coffee. When this ends, she said, and someone goes back, do you think the Vethkai will ever actually understand what they did? Not that it was strategically bad, what it actually was. He thought about carried light of ancestors, about the analyst who had written medically concerning in a report and classified it, about the High Council defending a directive with paperwork, while the institution fractures around them. He thought about the phrase they had used in their formal response, not wrong, an error, a matter of strategic miscalculation. I don't know, he said. I hope so. What if they don't? He was quiet for a while. Then we make sure the conversation we have is the kind that plants the question, he said. You can't make someone understand something, but you can put the thing in front of them and let it do its work. She looked at him. That's very patient for someone whose people have been doing this for 8 months. I have a speech in my pocket that was supposed to be about patience, he said. I think I owe it something. She set down her tea. She looked at him with the specific quality of attention she reserved for things she wanted to remember. Read it to me, she said. He did. There in the mess at something like 0300, with the stars moving slow outside the viewport and the ship humming around them, he unfolded Priya's speech for the first time in front of another person and read it out loud. His voice was steady for most of it. For one line it was not. Adeyeze did not say anything when he finished. She did not try to match it or contextualize it or put something gentle over it. She just sat with it, the way she sat with true things. After a while she said, she was good. Yeah, he said. You're going to read that to them, aren't you? The Vethkai. He folded the speech, put it back in his pocket. That's the plan, he said. The cessation request came in the 14th month. Not a surrender. The Vethkai did not have a word for surrender that translated cleanly, which Yusuf had suspected for some time was not a linguistic accident. What they transmitted was a formal notification of hostility suspension, their phrasing, accompanied by a request for what they called structured communicative engagement. In human terms, they wanted to talk. He translated the request himself, in the communications bay where he had been working since 0400, because the overnight feed had flagged the transmission as priority, and the priority classification had woken him before the duty officer got to it, and he had dressed in approximately 90 seconds and arrived at the bay in the particular state of adrenaline that was not quite fear and not quite anticipation, but the narrow space between them where the body runs on something purer than either. He translated it twice, read it 3 times, verified the classification level. Then he sat for 5 minutes and let himself understand what he was reading. They had been running the model. The 4 species that had withdrawn from Directive 7 Omicron had put the unanimous endorsement requirement in formal jeopardy. A 5th species had been making noises about a review request. The Vethkai High Council was looking at the arithmetic of their own institutional legitimacy and finding that the arithmetic did not favor continued hostility. The military campaign had not beaten them, No one had beaten the conclave, in a conventional military sense. That was not what had happened. What had happened was that humanity had walked into the galaxy's most stable governing institution, and, by existing in a way the institution could not classify, had produced a structural crisis that the institution could not resolve without doing the one thing it had specifically tried to avoid. Talking. He filed the translation with 3 flags and a note. Recommend immediate briefing with Admiral Oduya. Oduya called him in 8 minutes later. She was dressed. Of course she was. She read the request. She looked up. "It's time," she said. He nodded. "You volunteered for the contact team 3 months ago," she said. It was not a question. She had the specific knowledge of a commanding officer who knows what people are going to do before they do it. "Yes, Admiral. I'm naming you lead contact officer," she said. "You will go to the station. You will meet with their designated representative. You will not have military escort." He had fought for that provision in the preparatory memos he had filed 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, the collection of documents that were either strategic foresight or wishful thinking depending on which week you read them in. "No armed escort," he confirmed. "No armed escort," she said. "You go as what you are." "A diplomat," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said, and something in the word had weight he did not examine too closely. He went to his quarters. He packed the same small bag he had packed when he first came aboard the Johannesburg. Translator. A change of clothes. Priya's speech, creases soft now, folded in thirds in the inside pocket, where it had lived for 14 months. Adeze was in the corridor when he came out. She looked at the bag. "You volunteered," she said. 14 months ago I would have said I was assigned," he said. "At this point, I think we can drop the pretense." She leaned against the corridor wall in the particular way she had of occupying space without requiring it. She looked at him with the specific attention she used for things she was memorizing. "What are you going to say to them?" she said. He had been asked this before. He had answered vaguely, "Today, because the shuttle was in 40 minutes, and because Adeze deserved something real." He thought about it honestly. "I don't know exactly," he said, "but there's something I need them to hear. The speech." The speech. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him briefly, firmly, the kind of embrace that carries weight without being about it, and stepped back. "Don't let them put your suit back on," she said. He had no response to that was not either too small or too large. He laughed. She nodded once, which was her version of "see you soon," and walked away down the corridor without looking back. He stood there for a moment. Then he picked up his bag and went to the shuttle bay. The docking corridor of the Vethkai station was longer than he expected. He had seen the station from the outside for 14 months. He had translated thousands of communications that originated from it. He had built, in his head, a detailed picture of the beings behind those communications, their formal syntax, their institutional language, the particular way they constructed a request versus a demand, the places where emotion bled through the formality in ways they clearly did not intend. Walking through their corridor was different from knowing all of that. The scale was one thing. The station had been built for beings who were substantially larger than humans, which meant the proportions were wrong in a way that was immediately physical. Ceilings too high, dimensions slightly off, not hostile, just not designed for him. The light was different, cooler. The Vethkai ran their environmental systems at a spectrum slightly outside standard human preference. He could see fine. It just felt like seeing in a place that had not been expecting his particular eyes. He walked alone, no escort, human or Vethkai, until he reached the end of the corridor, where a single being waited. Tall, bilateral. The specific quality of stillness he had read about in the intelligence summaries. Every motion considered before made. Nothing wasted. Nothing impulsive. He had read descriptions of Vethkai physiology for 14 months. Standing in front of one was the gap between reading and understanding. The being studied him. He stood still and let himself be studied. This was something he had learned in 11 years of first contact work. Being seen without flinching is its own form of communication. After a long moment, the Vethkai representative spoke. The translation device in his ear caught it, processed it. rendered it in standard with approximately 87% confidence, which was better than he had hoped. The Vethkai said, "You are not what we expected." He had prepared for many opening statements. That was not one he had specifically planned for, but it was one he had earned the right to answer honestly. "No," he said. "We hear that a lot." The Vethkai waited. Silence in Vethkai diplomatic context, he had learned, was active rather than passive. It meant, continue. "I am Lieutenant Commander Yusuf Adebayo," he said. "I serve the United Nations Contact Corps of Earth. I was aboard the vessel Meridian when Ambassador Priya Sethi made contact with your border systems 14 months ago." He paused. "I was there when you returned her." The Vethkai's stillness did not change, but something in the room changed. He could not have named it with precision, a quality of attention perhaps. The difference between a being listening because it is required to, and a being listening because something has made it necessary. "We were informed," the Vethkai said, "that this contact would seek terms of cessation." "It will," Yusuf said, "but not yet." The Vethkai waited. He reached into his jacket. He unfolded the speech. It was soft now, the paper. 14 months of being carried. He held it with the care you give something that has survived something. "Ambassador Sethi wrote this before she came to you," he said. "She never got to say it. She packed it in her diplomatic pouch, and she crossed your corridor boundary, and she intended to stand in front of your representatives and say every word of it." He looked at the paper. "I thought you should hear it." The Vethkai said nothing. He read it. He read the whole thing. His voice held for most of it. For one line it did not. He read past the one line without stopping, and held the rest steady. When he finished, the room was quiet in a way that rooms are only quiet when something has filled them up, and the filling needs a moment to settle. He folded the speech, put it back in his pocket. He looked at the Vethkai representative. "She wrote that believing you were worth meeting," he said. "She flew to your border believing that. Whatever your classification system says about what we are, that is what she was. That is what we sent." The Vethkai was very still. Then, carefully, in the formal register of someone choosing words with the precision of someone who has learned that words have consequences, "We made an error." Not, "We did something wrong." Not, "We understand what she was." An error. He had thought about this moment. He had thought about it in the mess at 0300, in his quarters, in the tactical bay while running translations. He had thought about what he would feel when it arrived. What he felt was not what he had expected. He had expected anger, or something like vindication, which is what anger looks like when the thing you were angry about turns out to have been exactly what you thought it was. What he felt was something older and more complicated. The specific weight of standing in a room where something that cannot be fixed is being acknowledged. Not fixed, not taken back, just acknowledged. In the only way a 10,000-year institution was apparently capable of acknowledging anything, carefully, formally, at the exact minimum distance from the truth. "Yes," he said, "you did." He did not say, "And we lost people in the months that followed." He did not say, "And the cost of that error is still being calculated." He did not say, "And Priya Sethi deserved better than to be filed under administrative procedure." He did not say any of those things. He held them all at once, the whole weight of 14 months in that small hot space behind his eyes, and he said, "Yes," and he left the rest sitting in the room where anyone paying attention could see it. The Vethkai said, "You wish to discuss terms." "I wish to discuss what comes after terms," he said. "Terms are the minimum. They are the floor, not the ceiling. What I came here to discuss is whether there is anything above the floor." The Vethkai studied him. That same quality of assessment, not hostile, just thorough, the examination of a being who has been wrong about something fundamental and is in the very early stages of trying to understand how that happened. "You came without military escort," the Vethkai said. "Yes." "The previous emissary came without military escort." "Yes," he said. "That is the kind of people we are. We know it doesn't guarantee the outcome. We come anyway." A long silence. "Then, we will discuss the terms of cessation, and we will discuss what you call the ceiling." He nodded. They sat down. It took 4 days. Not because the terms were complicated. In their bones, the terms were simple: cessation of hostilities, acknowledgement of the legal question regarding Directive 7 Omicron, establishment of a formal contact framework that replaced the pre-threshold classification with something humanity had suggested, and the Vethkai had, after considerable discussion, accepted. Emergent sovereign, meaning a species not yet integrated, but recognized as having the standing to negotiate on its own terms. Not equal standing, not yet. The history of 10,000 years and 3 months did not produce equal standing. But standing. That was the ceiling Yusuf had come to find. Not equality, not in a room, not on a document. Just the recognition that humanity existed in the galaxy as something more than a file to be managed. That was the ceiling. It was enough. For now. On the 4th day, after the formal documents were finalized, and the representatives from 3 other conclave species who had joined the final session had added their endorsements, Yusuf sat across from the Vethkai representative in the quiet that follows the end of a long formal process. The representative said something he had not expected. The speech, the representative said, the parts she wrote about connection, about the cost being worth the risk. Yusuf waited. Does your species believe that universally? He thought about the 61 hours of coalition building, about Adeze and her absolute absence of fear about the wrong things, about Oduya and her 3-decision lead on every room, about Ensign Danjuma and his football poster, about 21 names on a list and the way the Meridian had gone quiet when the recovery team docked. Not universally, he said honestly. We argue about almost everything, constantly, loudly. We have been arguing about the right way to treat each other for as long as we have had language to argue in. He paused. But there are things we tend to agree on eventually. Usually after they cost us enough. The Vethkai was quiet. This cost you, the representative said. Considerably. Yes. And yet you are here, proposing the same thing she proposed. Proposing it better, he said, because now you're listening. The silence that followed was long enough that he almost filled it. He did not fill it. He had learned, in 14 months of reading Vethkai communication, that their silences did specific things. This one was doing the thing that he had started, privately, to call the recalculation, a quality of stillness that preceded a shift in position, as though the being behind it was updating something internal. Your model predicted us wrong, he said, not as an accusation, evenly, as a fact. The framework that said we would retreat, we did not retreat. What your model was measuring was not what we actually are. What are you? The Vethkai said. Not rhetorically. It was a genuine question, the kind that only becomes possible once someone has accepted that their previous answer was wrong. He thought about how to say it. We are beings who decided, he said, that the cost of connection was worth the risk of rejection. He had not planned to use her line. He used it anyway. The representative absorbed it. We have a word, the representative said eventually, in the old formal language, that we use for species that demonstrate irrational persistence in the face of rational disincentive. Yusuf braced slightly. It is considered a compliment, the representative said, in the old texts. He exhaled slowly. We would accept that, he said. The shuttle back to the Johannesburg was quiet. He was alone in it. He had requested that specifically, not because he needed the solitude, but because there were things that happen in the aftermath of things that are better held in private before they are shared. He held Priya's speech, not reading it, just holding it, the paper that had been in his pocket through 14 months of the worst and strangest and most important thing he had ever lived through. He thought about her. Not the formal version of her that he had been carrying, the diplomat, the emissary, the name on a document that started a war, the real version. The one who took up space in a room and was glad about it. The one who said she was jealous he didn't get to go first. The one who packed a speech in a pouch and crossed a border believing in the outcome she was trying to build. She would have had opinions about how the documents were worded. She would have found specific phrases in the formal cessation terms and had a position on every single one. She would have already known the name of the Vethkai representative and had questions ready that Yusuf had not thought to ask. She would have been on this shuttle ahead of him by 2 months, sending back detailed reports, and probably learning their language without a translation device, just because it seemed rude not to try. She would have been insufferable. He pressed his forehead against the cold window of the shuttle and looked at the stars, and the Vethkai station behind him, and the enormous dark between the two, and he felt the weight of 14 months like a physical thing that was slowly, carefully, setting itself down. He thought about what came next. Not the formal process. He knew what the formal process looked like. He had been drafting its architecture in his head for 6 months. He thought about the actual next, the thing underneath the process. Humanity was in the galaxy now in a different way than it had been 14 months ago. Not welcome, not equal, not done, not close to done, but present in a way that had standing. Present in a way that the oldest institution in known space had been forced to acknowledge, because the alternative was the continued unraveling of a 10,000-year model, and even the most rigid institution has a limit to how long it can pay that price. Someone was going to have to do the work of what came next. The slow, grinding, unglamorous work of being the human who shows up again after the cost has already been paid, who keeps showing up, who reads the documents and learns the syntax and asks the questions, and reads the silences and does not, ever, let the file stay closed. He knew who that someone was going to be. He had known for a while. He pressed his hand flat against the cold shuttle window and felt the dark on the other side of the glass and thought, I am still here. Priya would have hated how long it took. She would have been back on that station within a week. She would have learned their names. She would have memorized their formal syntax and their informal idioms and their old texts with their old compliments about irrational persistence, and she would have collected every phrase that had no human equivalent and hoarded them in a personal document she showed no one, and she would have been impossibly excited about every single one. She would have been the best person who ever did this job. He decided, in the quiet of the shuttle between the station and the ship, that he was going to be that person instead. Not as well as she would have, but as well as he could. And then better than that, because she would have expected better than that, and the least he could do was live up to a standard set by someone who flew toward an ancient, enormous thing she had never met before and thought it was worth whatever it cost. It was worth it. It turned out she was right. The shuttle moved through the dark, and the stars did not comment on any of it, and Yusuf held a folded piece of paper in both hands and thought, okay, let's go find out what comes next.